Hi, my name's Andy Jordan, and I have been a cybersecurity professional for close to 20 years now. In fact, I started my own company focusing on vulnerability management because I really enjoy it so much. AI is a big frontier for everybody in the cybersecurity space. So I wanted to take a real-world analysis of this, and I've created a sanitized document. I will pull it up here just for you guys to take a look at. And again, I've been in vulnerability management for a very long time. So for me, I have a very deep love for Excel documents. I apologize if this is long and not as exciting to you, but this is my bread and butter within the cybersecurity space. The data coming out of this, just to give you some background, is tenable. And again, I've taken some pains to make sure that this is a sanitized data set that you have, so that way we can look through this in great detail together. To give you an understanding of all the rows, we have 150,000 rows, and we basically have all kinds of findings here from a varying list of dates and scan times that we have. And so this should be just about an entire year's worth of vulnerability data. That's a lot. But if we're looking at some of these things, a good vulnerability analyst is going to be able to say like, hey, here's where things are, not just for this month, but where are our trends across the entire year? So that way we can see how we're actually fixing things, remediating them, following up on previous issues. This is important to us. So I am asking a lot. What am I asking? I'm asking the AI to analyze this document. And so we're going to walk through what that process was like for me. So my goal was to identify patch management and configuration management processes and gaps and other types of things that really should be part of a day-to-day vulnerability management program. I did use two separate AI systems here, and we'll kind of walk through them as we go along. The first one's going to be ChatGPT, and I've actually used version 4 and version 5. I've also looked at Olama and building your own local AI, and it can kind of walk through that process a little bit. And so ultimately, this is really the real world test that we're going to do. Now, some initial and early answers, if you don't want to watch the rest of the video or you want to skip ahead, trying to load 150,000 rows into any of these systems is just, it's not going to work. And so ultimately I had to condense this down to 50 rows, or 50,000 rows, I apologize. Ultimately, both still struggled. Both were not amazing, and ultimately AI or local AI could be really helpful, but was probably even more limited in terms of the functionality and answers that I got. So let's take a look at how ChatGPT started with this. Now again, we're on thinking 5 right now, but let's be really honest, this is going to be a bit of a historic one that I've been playing with this for a while, so I did start with 4, and so I realize it says that right now. Just understand that this is version 4 that we are starting with. I tried to load the entire data set, and again, just to make sure that we're clear, this is the data set that we have here. And then when we looked at it, it basically said, hey, I wanted you just to review and analyze the report, and then it basically ran through a bunch of things, and actually eventually it did finish after running quite a while, but it still got stuck. So it loaded the first 5,000 rows and then continued to load through this. After it loaded, it basically gave me this, and this is where it basically crashed. It didn't do a good job handling large data sets. Now, for this organization, again, we're talking about a year's worth of vulnerability data, so maybe we could go with less, but we're talking about an organization that's only like 10,000 assets, maybe let's say like 13,000 assets when we really start looking at some of the network devices and everything else. Maybe we'll increase to 15, 1,500 devices because there's all over, and maybe because IoT and all kinds of other network peripherals are out there, conference rooms, VoIP phones, and everything else. Maybe we'll say that this is an organization with a total IP count of maybe 5,000. That's it. That's all we're talking here. So if your organization is much larger than that, or if you want, or if you have a much longer time frame that you want to look at things, it's going to be problematic for you. And so ultimately, one of the things that I did, and I'm just kind of scrolling through as a display for you. Here is a deep dive it did. It was problematic. We'll skip to. So then I took it and said, hey, let me just give you a sanitized data set and see how you do with that. and it actually got a lot better. It started populating the information that was present and did some deep dives and everything else. So that part is really helpful. And so I wanted to understand, like, okay, vulnerability data is actually pretty sensitive. Now, again, this is a sanitized data set. I understand what I'm playing with here. I'm not going to go putting vulnerability data of an actual company out there for ChatGPT, even though this is a paid for license, right? So you get a little bit of cloistering or keeping things in a secure environment. However, it's like, okay, well, what if I wanted to build my own AI? So that's what I did. There were two pieces that I used to basically build this out that I think you guys can look at today to start playing with your own local AI models. I think this first example is pretty funny. Help me with procrastination, which is hysterical. So we'll let that play and do what it's supposed to do. The two pieces that we have for the models that you can play with, the first one's called Ollama, and that's going to give you all of the data sets and everything else that you might need to actually reference all those things. So when they say that, hey, we need to build out a model, Ollama is a series of models that you can download and apply to your desktop. And again, this is the machine that everything's running on. A little bit of background for that because it's interesting and important. It was basically an amazing machine about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's got a AMD 5990, 5590. I can't remember the processor. We'll pull it up later. I've got a 3090 graphics card, and that's probably the biggest one that we want. So again, is it the best? Maybe. It's not a 5090, it's a 3090. So from some of those things, like it's great. Now, it's a wonderful machine. I'm very happy with it. I have no concerns. And it did kind of process through some of those requests. And I think it's there. Now you can certainly start to program some of those other things with it. So as we get back into, can AI support some of those things? We'll watch it here and we'll say, hey, that same sanitized data set, we'll progress it here. And you can see that it starts to spin. Now this is actually going to fail. And I'm gonna only let it run for so long because you can see I'm gonna start really taxing out my system on top of recording, on top of all the other things. So I'm only gonna let it go for a little bit. But please believe me and trust me when I say, like, it's not actually going to complete. It gets stuck halfway through, and the information that it gives wasn't great. In fact, when I was originally running this, I originally started with just the Ollama version in basically a command prompt, and basically loaded everything. And after 3 or 4 hours, it finally loaded, but it didn't have any memory or contextual awareness of the previous query. So I had to keep loading in the Excel document. After the first 3 hours, I wasn't interested. And so this is where I think Open Web UI comes in to give you that web look. So that way it's very similar to the AI that we're using in Gemini, in Copilot, in ChatGPT, and all the other kind of things that we're used to with generative AI. There's another piece to say, like, okay, well, maybe it's just not good with eating up Excel document. I agree. That might be a risk. And so ultimately, long term, maybe I'll look at trying to pull this data in with a JSON file or some other thing that's a little bit easier for AIs to progress through this type of information. But how much of a developer do I need to be in order to actually do vulnerability data? So there's a little bit of give and take for that. This is ultimately going to fail out. So I'm going to spend a minute and just kind of terminate this. So that way I have less of the annoying things running all the time. Okay, intact. Cool. All right. So we've closed out Ollama and our local AI, and let's, again, didn't process, which is not exactly great. Again, I'm going to keep working on local AI models because I think they're really interesting, and I think agentics as a way to automate some of these security activities is a really interesting space that I want to learn a little bit more about. But for right now, it's still kind of a struggle in solutioning to actually create those things. So as we go back over to ChatGPT, let's look at some of the things that we had. Now, again, I'm going to quickly scroll and highlight this because there's a lot to it that I want to basically skip over and make it interesting for us. So the prompt after it basically ran through everything was, please identify the patching or configuration best practices that would have been fixed by these issues. And the goal was to identify a process gap that would have allowed this vulnerability to present itself. Meaning, hey, if we would have just closed out this service, if we would have uninstalled this application, if we would have, included Java as part of our patching process, then this would have been taken care of a lot better. So in the 50,000 rows, again, I took the top 50, and it just so happened to be there was a lot more network devices in that breakdown than there was, but it said, hey, ping is a thing, you should fix ICMP or ping. SSL issues, and again, this was taken from the original data set as an internal vulnerability scan, so there's going to be self-signed certs all over the place, and weak hashing algorithms and some of those other things that organizationally we need to kind of work through within this organization. I think a lot of us have seen a lot of these things already. So we asked it to do an analysis, and I think it was interesting. I think it's problematic in terms of its ability to actually tell us what the process gap was. It wasn't reliable. And so there could be a issue with the policy. It could be an issue with ownership issues. It could be cadence in terms of when things are applied. And so I think that's kind of a problem of where AI kind of fell short. There's another one that I asked it to say, like, hey, how do I, route this? And again, I kind of asked more about some of these things. I continued to ask and got grumpy or failing responses. And then I said, okay, that's kind of cool. What would be the difference of escalating some of these issues to a development team versus an IT team? Because I think we're going to see a lot of those, in day-to-day organization. And so ultimately, again, it's going to be weird, like the team routing and the accuracy to really understand what issues should go to your development team or not are going to be pretty problematic. The next one is consistency. And I noticed this one over time, but I'm sure you guys will do the same type of process, yourself. And if you ask ChatGPT something 3 or 4 times, you might get 3 or 4 different answers, which is kind of problematic. And so you get a consistency problem. The other one, and this is last, is ultimately AI is going to take some best effort, but based on the prompts and some of those other things, you might get varying different answers, meaning a critical issue might not always be fully presented to say, if you only had 3 things that you could do, we want to make sure that the 3 things are the most valuable to the organization. And the reality is sometimes 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 in a risk scenario for AI. And as security analysts, we need to make sure that the recommendations that we're putting out to organizations, that this issue always going to be the top issue, no matter what part of the week it is, how much sleep or not sleep you've gotten, how much caffeine you've had that week. You always need to make sure that you're escalating the right issues at the right time according to the risks within your organization or your risk appetite. And sometimes with AI, you're going to get some different answers, and that creates some variance and inconsistency and distrust with, ultimately how I look at just using AI to analyze some of this information. So AI is not completely a bad guy. Like, this wasn't the goal, is to figure out okay, let's just bash AI and say it's not going to take my job. And that really wasn't the point of this video at all. And so I wanted to better understand, where can it help? And I think I found some things that it's really good with, right? These are areas where it's going to succeed, and I think you should try and leverage it. It's really good at really summarizing some of the vulnerability trends. It's pretty good at highlighting some obvious clusters or grouping types of things together. It's really good about deduping information and going through some of the initial kind of just unfun things that happen in Excel. It's good at drafting executive summaries, or perhaps giving better examples or things or different types of stories that someone could use to help present technical information to non-technical audience. And I think all those things are great. AI is going to be helpful. In fact, I think many of us are using it day to day in all kinds of different activities. But I think we really need a human to check through some of this stuff. And this is where I think identifying the root cause or the process gaps are important. And this is where a human is going to be much better at solving some of those. We need to make sure that we're routing vulnerabilities to the right teams. We need a consistent risk-based prioritization, and we need to be able to handle reasonably medium to large data sets. And I think AI could help, but we have to have a human for some of those things. Otherwise AI is going to, potentially struggle. And so if we're using both AI and a human to validate that process, we might get some really good results here. The last one that I think is probably the most is kind of next in this. Here's where AI is just not ready, right? Do not fully automate your vulnerability process using AI. It probably is not going to be a good yet. Maybe it'll get there. It's not really good about making contextual judgments. access without review, meaning it doesn't know your organization, and you might need to pull in a bunch of information to make it better for you. It's not really good about ingesting or handling a massive data set without any issues at all. Like it's going to struggle. It's going to take a couple times. And at some point in time, like I've been doing this enough times that sometimes I'd rather just spend 3 hours myself than trying to, and manually go through things in Excel than potentially like seeing that I could maybe script something out, and it always takes me longer to script. So I'm just lazy and stay with Excel. The last one is, of course, we talked through this, maintaining a consistent risk ranking system. And this is, again, we need this to be correct. It always has to be there. But if you have a reference model, it could be, empty. So when am I going to look at generative AI again? Like what are my trigger points to say like, okay, if it did this, maybe let's figure out and try again. Like it's not a stop. It's just a wait. So what are my trigger points? If I have a large set of risk information to help prioritize the vulnerabilities, because again, like we want to understand the industry, we want to understand threat exposure, we need to understand kind of the organizational priorities to say like, hey, like maybe we have a giant project, or maybe we have a new building that's going to be created. All those things are really interesting, and we should highlight some of those contextually. If you have a reference for systems or services that are business critical, again, like we need to understand if we had to prioritize something, we need to fix the right things at the right times. We need to fix everything, but ultimately there is a prioritization that needs to happen for some of those. Ultimately, if you can link in 60 days of ticket information to compare how issues have been addressed, you're going to get helpful triaging of data. So which teams support which issues historically, and then of course, potentially what other compensating controls might you want to apply. So for again, you can patch Microsoft Office, or you can uninstall Microsoft Office if it's on a system that you never use. And both of those are going to be solutions. The last one is when the organization, and again, this is where ultimately within technology teams, many of us understand that sometimes we need a process first before we need the tool. And so just adding AI information and having AI directly start creating tickets for us doesn't mean that that information is going to be easily understood. And that team that receives the information is going to know what to do with it. And so we really do want to understand a consistent process to say, I'm going to submit some tickets first. We'll see how that goes. As long as that's a consistent process, then we can open up the floodgates with more. But until that, we should probably hold off. And so until these points, I really believe that machine learning or playbooks is a better approach. So what do I mean when I say machine learning or playbooks? That's a bit of a loaded statement, Andy. I've spent a lot of time in vulnerability management, and this is where like I've built out a Power BI environment to help track many of those. And so we start with 3 critical things that we start with: asset visibility, to make sure that we're always scanning the right assets all the time. Because if you didn't scan that asset, that means that potentially that asset may have vulnerabilities that you're not aware of. And ultimately, we want to make sure that we're seeing everything. Additionally, if you look at the average number of vulnerabilities on assets, or if you look at any vulnerability report, you're going to see that there's critical all over the place. Everything is red. And the challenge is sometimes if that asset isn't scanned, your numbers of vulnerabilities are going to go up and down and everything else. And it becomes really hard to know what you can do that actually fixes the problem, because sometimes the numbers go down, but is that because you fixed it? Is that because the device was just not online? Was it fixed and then there was an issue that it had to be rolled back? And ultimately, one of the things that I have found most success in vulnerability management programs is the ability to average out the number of vulnerabilities. So this means next month that maybe you only scan 8 of the 10 devices that you were expecting. The average number of vulnerabilities for that should stay consistent. Like let's say it's on desktop, and you know that on average those desktops have 5 vulnerabilities. And so while your total numbers did go down, the average about the same, meaning you're not making the progress that you would like. And so it gives you a better ability to track progress. And then again, I do wear a CISO hat quite a bit. We do need to track and understand the exploitable devices against our systems. So that's all well and good. And I think this is, maybe we could have AI do this. The next challenge as we start applying those things is, really running through an analysis. And this is something to where this system has basically been built out, and it takes about an hour to get through all of the data. So we have our critical systems. We'll look at, workstations and say, hey, we see a lot of critical risks happening on these devices. And we want to better understand what that that looks like. We'll look at it at a deeper level here. So let's say we want critical devices, we want those workstations, and ultimately we can see from a trend we're actually going down as a process, which means like, hey, the process is working. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have issues here. Like we need to go patch this, Windows update, but, is this the biggest risk to the organization? Or more stated a different way, it seems like the patching process is working to apply these things. And maybe we just have an inconsistent timing of when a patch is pushed out versus when the vulnerability scan was performed. And so let's let that process continue. So instead of focusing on that, let's go find something else that might actually be more of a problem. So instead of that, let's look at servers and say servers have actually increased with this, and we need to figure out what's going on. So we have a lot of .NET Core and all kinds of issues that this patch just isn't applied. And so I think being able to find out some of those issues and quickly identify them is a bit more valuable. Now, again, could I find this with AI? Maybe. The challenge is when you give AI the data, you have to ask it more questions and hope that it gives you more things to look at and say, okay, that wasn't as much of an issue. You need to guide it a bit more. You couldn't just have it ask a question and then it finds interesting things and it gives them back to you. And there's a bunch here. So again, this is my methodology for going through vulnerability stuff. This is a very scripted understanding that when I see this type of vulnerability, this is what it means. These are our typical remediation pathways. And this is where I think there's a lot of value in this approach. So I think in closing, I'm going to keep playing with AI. I think AI has a lot of capabilities to really help. Ultimately, I do think that it has some room to grow as it relates to fully being used and replacing anyone within a cybersecurity role. There's just too much analysis, too much organizational context that needs to be understood for us to be effective in our mission of protecting organization. I'm still on a road to learn. So if you've got feedback for me, I'd love to hear it in terms of things that, maybe I should look into. If you have more questions for me, I'd love to hear some other topics of things that I have found across my career. I'd love to be a resource for you. But ultimately, I thank you for taking some time to hang out, and I will talk to you guys later.